Hey, this is Language Shrimp. Today we're talking about glide consonants. Glide consonants don't really have a solid definition, but are generally the optional in-between for regular consonants and vowels. There are two main types, liquids, which are lateral and rhotic sounds like English la and ra, and semivowels, which are produced like vowels but used like consonants, like English wa and ya. I'm going to go through all the glides in the consonant starter kit, talk about their variants across languages and sound changes and series that derive from them, while also talking about interesting related glides along the way, then finish off by covering some glide phonotactics. First of all, the rhotic, most commonly the alveolar trill. This sound is by far the most varied sound in the consonant starter kit, and it is extremely hard to define what a rhotic is, with some sounds that serve as a rhotic in one language acting more like basic consonant in another. However, most languages have a rhotic sound, and you can generally tell if a sound is rhotic because the IPA symbol is R-based, and they generally sound similar to our ears. Some common rhotics, in no particular order, include the alveolar trill, the most common rhotic, the alveolar flap, the uvular trill or fricative, the alveolar approximant, the retroflex flap, and the retroflex approximant. Some languages include a mix of two rhotics. Often this comes in the form of a trill-flap distinction, like in Spanish with its two alveolar rhotics. These systems often evolve from lenition and gemination systems, resulting in partial allophony between a more tense trill and lax flap. Portuguese and Bengali are both interesting for containing a trill-flap distinction that goes between two places of articulation. Portuguese differentiating between a uvular trill, or fricative, and an alveolar flap, and Bengali differentiating between an alveolar trill and a retroflex flap. Other languages may have general widespread split between the rhotics, such as many Australian Aboriginal languages containing both an alveolar and retroflex rhotic, which I'll get more into in a bit. Next we have the lateral, which is much more consistent. You will almost never see a language have only one lateral consonant and see it not be the alveolar. You may occasionally see a dental one due to alveolar dental shift, although it often resists the shift like the sibilant. And there is one language I found that uses the velar lateral as its one lateral, Yagaria, although I'd love to find out if there's more. This language is the only one listed with this sound on PHOIBLE. However, there are a good number of languages with more than one lateral. Some languages contain a palatal lateral, like Spanish, which often comes from either geminated la or more commonly palatalization, which I'll get into on the Palatal Glide. Or they might contain a retroflex lateral, often to symmetrize with a retroflex series in the language, and or due to contact with a retroflex rhotic. The Australian Aboriginal languages are known for their large variety of liquids, coinciding with an unusual set of places of articulation. These languages often make the rare distinction between dental and alveolar plosives, which extends to its laterals. It also distinguishes further with a retroflex series that affects both its lateral and rhotic, and it contains a palatal lateral with its palatal series. The language Arunda then takes this even further by having a labialization distinction on most of its consonants, leading to 12 liquids and 16 total glides. On the flip side, there are of course languages that lack one or both liquids. Japanese famously lacks la, and then plenty of Central and Northern American languages have no rhotic, only containing lateral liquids, and then the Seneca language lacks liquids altogether. Now I have two main series that derive from liquids. Firstly, retroflex consonants. Their plosives almost always just come from interactions between the rhotic and alveolar or dental series. You can see this play out in many of the Nordic and Indic languages. Interestingly, it's not always the retroflex rhotic that causes the retroflex series to form. The alveolar rhotics can have similar effects. I've also noticed that there seems to be a trend of retroflex consonants generally preferring to appear medially first, before spreading to other positions. Sometimes, much less commonly, the retroflex series can derive from the language's lateral. This typically happens alongside the rhotic, though. The retroflex sibilant series, though, is kind of unique. It can develop from similar circumstances to the plosive, but it is often a result of what I call the split cha system, which I'll get into in a bit. Next, you have the alveolar lateral affricate series. This can of course come from clusters of la and alveolar plosives, mainly allophonically and rarely, due to the fact that alveolars generally don't like clustering with la, examples being some dialects of Hebrew and Arabic. Interestingly, you don't see this change that often though. I perhaps should have put this series in my basic consonant series, but that still feels wrong because I have like a crack theory that you rarely see tla develop because languages hate the ta-la cluster so much that it tends to quickly either disappear or immediately affricate. There are of course still some languages that tolerate the unaffricated tla cluster though, mainly many Slavic and Bantu languages. There are some examples of more interesting non-la-based ways that this series is formed, though. In Icelandic, tla formed from its very weird and unique liquid and nasal devoicing systems. When clusters of ra or la, voiced or voiceless forms appeared, they'd shift into tla depending on exact circumstance. Nahuatl developed tla very weirdly, not being related to la at all, instead resulting from ta before back vowels. Next, we have semivowels. As mentioned, semivowels are like vowels used as consonants. They are consonants made in the same place with the same manner as vowels. Usually, this only works with close vowels, and the most common close vowels are e and u, hence the consonant starter kit semivowels being ya and wa. Other close vowels can have semivowel counterparts, though, and often if a language has an additional close vowel, they'll develop a corresponding semivowel. Although this isn't always the case. There are plenty of languages with close vowels that don't get semivowels. And sometimes they get semivowels that don't have corresponding vowels, like wa appearing in many North American languages that lack u. I'd like to note two weird semivowels, though. The Pharengeal glide la is sometimes described as a semivowel of a, but I haven't seen a language where it really acts like it. There's also rarely the rhotic vowel which can vary in exact manifestation by the rhotic, and in that case, the rhotic might act as a semivowel of Okay, now onto the starter kit semivowels. Wa is generally pretty consistent where it appears, but sometimes it may shift to the labiodental approximant wa, in which case it's not really a semivowel or liquid anymore, but it still acts mostly the same. Chukchi has an interesting system where it contains a separate labial and velar fricative/approximant, that both act like the other glides of the language, although the bilabial glide is sometimes written as labiovelar. The labiovelar series is also pretty common, and unsurprisingly mainly just comes from interactions between the Labiovelar Glide and velar consonants. Finally, one of the more influential glides is the Palatal Glide. It is rather consistent like la, not really having any major alternate forms. And it, along with front vowels, is responsible for the most common and influential sound change in linguistics, palatalization. Palatalization is where front vowels in the glide ya and various combinations cause consonants around them to change in specific ways. Typically, the close vowel e is more likely than any other front vowels to trigger this change. And the velar series, being the one most in the vowel space, is the series most likely to be affected by it. I've mentioned ka becoming tsa in the Romance palatalization, but much more commonly the velar series will shift into the palatal, alveolar, sibilant, affricate series. Often along with this, the alveolar nasal will shift into the palatal nasal, and the alveolar sibilant will shift into the palatal alveolar sibilant. There are other palatalization schemes than the alveolar or palatal alveolar, however. There's what I call the split cha or sha system. Often, because of the fact that palatalization is so common, it might happen more than once in a language. When a language tries to develop a series through the normal means, but already has a palatal alveolar series, the second palatalization might result in alveopalatal series instead. And yes, I see the confusing names. But then, once the two separate series exist, the palatal alveolar series will generally want to shift into a retroflex series to dissimilate from the alveopalatal series. This happened in Polish. Separately, though, if a language already has a retroflex series of some sort, a similar thing might happen. When Mandarin went through the standard velar palatalization change, along with its pre-existing retroflex system, formed the split cha distinction. Another interesting example is Swedish. The Swedish clusters kya and tya resulted in an alveopalatal fricative or affricate, while clusters involving the sibilant and ya resulted in the notoriously controversial SJ sound, which in most dialects is pronounced as retroflex. Then we have a palatalization system I personally love, Iotation. This is when consonants gain a palatal coarticulation near front vowels and or the palatal glide, kinda meaning that the palatal sound is pronounced throughout the phoneme. A lot of times when this occurs, the sound may further evolve to distinguish themselves from their iotated or non-iotated counterparts. Irish, for example, has all of its non-iotated consonants become velarized in response. This is also where the non-sibilant palatal series often comes in. While this sound does exist in a good number of languages due to the palatalization of the velar, it is usually a stepping stone to cha or tya. Here, though, due to the velar being in the vowel space, a fronted version of it often ends up just being palatal. Other glide coarticulations can also be found. Marshallese makes a three-way distinction between palatalized, velarized, and labialized consonants in certain series. And a few languages like the aforementioned Arante have full labial, non-labial split. These coarticulations often affect nearby vowels to varying degrees. In systems with velarized consonants, a back unrounded or central vowel series is likely to develop, like in Scottish Gaelic. Some languages take this to the extreme, like Abkhaz and Marshallese, which only really differentiate by vowel height and have all frontness and roundness determined by nearby consonants. I'd also like to mention a feature that acts a lot like vowel coarticulation, but doesn't evolve like it: Pharengealization. Found almost entirely in Arabic and Arabic-influenced languages. It evolved historically from the ejective series turning into a separate pharengealized series for most consonants. I mentioned that the pharyngeal glide is considered a semivowel of ah, and like Iotation, these consonants shift vowels to be more similar to its coarticulation. Now, I've said it before, and you've very likely noticed by now, glides follow very little symmetry with consonants. And that's because while they do very much influence each other and can very much hold symmetries, regular consonants, glide consonants, and vowels all tend to mostly stay in their own worlds, keeping symmetry with themselves. Like, a uvular trill as a glide doesn't necessarily indicate a full uvular series, and certainly not a full trill series. This is a common mistake I see. People like to think of approximate trills and taps as just like plosives and fricatives, thinking you can or even should just plop them in as a full series. With the exception of maybe the approximates sometimes, this just really isn't true. Very few languages have more than one trill or tap, so while it can be very fun to have your glides connect with and transform your basic consonants, and I certainly recommend you do so, do know that they are distinctive, and a great transition here, often have very distinct phonotactics. I mentioned in my last video that until I expand on glide phonotactics, just plop them between consonants and vowels. And this is because this is the most common place to find them. Some languages, like the notoriously phonotactically simple Polynesian languages, don't even allow this though, effectively giving glides all the same phonotactics as any consonant. On the flip side, like nasals, glides do often like being at the end of words more than most consonants. For semivowels, this basically just results in diphthongs, which I'll get into in my vowel video. But liquids can often share the end-of-word phonotactics I mentioned for nasals, although slightly less commonly. Glides also tend to not like being separated from vowels, whether being at the beginning or end of word or in the center of a cluster. Although this does happen in some languages, like French, specifically at the end of words. As for clusters of glides, these seem to be relatively rare, although I'll mention again how hard consonant clusters are to research. When these do appear, it seems to be generally more common for semivowels to follow liquids. This does occur in reverse sometimes, but it seemingly rarely. Clusters of just liquids or semivowels also seem to be rather rare. This is all often accepted word medially, though, due to word medial cluster sizes. These clusters also rarely ever occur with further consonants, like plosives, then two glides, although I'm sure this is possible somewhere. Next, glides can sometimes shift into normal consonants in certain situations. This often manifests as glides appearing after consonants and or between vowels, while turning into voiced fricatives at the beginning of words or in certain clusters. This most commonly occurs with semivowels, with wa often shifting into va and ya often shifting into ja. In the Romance languages, glides shifted into fricatives everywhere except for in clusters. One interesting type of this is depalatalization, where ya in these situations shifts into a velar or glottal fricative, like in Sanskrit or more notably Spanish, eventually resulting in the Spanish J representing cha. That should be all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I can't believe I've passed 50 subscribers. Remember to feel free to correct me or honestly just nerd out in the comments. I love learning new linguistic things or helping y'all learn them, and very much want to correct all the mistakes I'm likely to make. My next video should be in August as per schedule, and will be on vowels. The Phonology series is, in my opinion, probably going to be the most boring one, because you have to just list a bunch of stuff. Although my whole channel will probably have a bunch of that. But it's very important in my eyes to start there. But I think that the grammar videos will overall be more interesting than this stuff is.